It is exactly 8:54 a.m. and we here at Salam Media covered an amazing event yesterday in Soweto, and that, of course, was the Kasi Muslim Dialogue in Soweto. I listened and watched this clip yesterday. I think I watched for about 15 to 20 minutes and I was absolutely riveted. And I think that all of us as Muslims, as a Muslim community, and even non-Muslims should go onto our website, Salam Media's website, and please watch this clip. It makes for absolute riveting and riveting viewing and lots of food for thought. And we're going to take a listen and we're going to also watch this clip, not the entire clip because it's about 2 hours long. Thembisa Fakude takes us through part of the proceedings at the Kasi Muslim Dialogue in Soweto, Xenophobia, Afrophobia and Immigration. He also goes on to say that I think this is the most challenging time we have faced yet as a Muslim community. So let's take a listen and look to this video.
Examples in some of the points that we're facing as Muslims at this point in time, because I think this is the most challenging time we have faced yet as a Muslim community, mainly because we are likely or already started having this intra conflict within Muslims. I'll refer to what our Ustaz Isal Sepe used to refer to people like us. He used to call us the developing Muslims and the established Muslims. The established Muslims, he was referring to both our Malay and Indian brothers, and by developing was referring mainly to us as Muslims of African descent. So there is that possibility of this intra-conflict that we're seeing happening. And it is as a result of historical challenges that we've faced as Muslims within Islam in South Africa. Now the challenge is the way we're reacting is likely going to either take us forward or is going to take us backward. And I think this is why this discussion and this dialogue is very important. I'm hoping that this is the first of many dialogues that are going to take place in this regard. Because I think it's very important. We've seen a pushback, particularly from Muslims, the developing Muslims in some places, against the established Muslims, particularly during these protests of illegal migrants, with Muslims divided, some taking the position of a broader South African sentiment and others taking a anti and a position that is been espoused by the established Muslims by and large when it comes to matters of the illegal immigration. And it's unfortunate, of course, that the established Muslims decided to even issue statements that are further problematic, especially to us who live in the townships, because we are like the buffer, the first frontier to deal with this situation. Instead of taking a much more pragmatic approach, the established Muslims, unfortunately, have taken an approach which seek to serve and protect their own narrow interests, which is a problem. There is this blanket no to what's going on instead of engaging constructively with this very, very important socio-political discussion that all of us as South Africans are engaged in. So it serves an interest, particularly the capitalist business interest within the established Muslim communities, which has been a problem. I'm not saying all of them, but the majority of them, and at least some of the statements I've seen, seek to just blindly say no to what's been going on. And again, that's the problem. So today I want to talk about these trappings and how we should deal with this situation as Muslims, particularly the developing Muslims within societies. Because it's key on how we deal with this. Number one, I think culturally we have been, and we are guilty of othering. We have decided, for some reasons, to actually embrace a culture that has now become challenged within the Muslim or within the townships from which we come from. And the reason why that's the case is because Islam was given to us from a certain perspective and by certain people. And alhamdulillah, Allah bless them, because they did give us Islam, and that's why we're Muslims today. But what we're seeing happening right now is a backlash, a pushback. We are now the other within our townships, within our families. Particularly our women who have got no choice but to look a certain part outside their homes. They are now becoming the other, notwithstanding that they are part and parcel of these societies and township. And this is a challenge that I think all of us need to deal with and look at it in a way that is going to help us survive, but also help us continue propagating Islam within our communities. I've argued, and I'll continue to argue, that our mothers and cousins who are not Muslims have always observed hijab. They might not necessarily have been dressing in black, but have always observed hijab. And as a result, there's never been a problem between them and the other, because it's part and parcel of our culture. And I'll also be self-critical that what we did, on the other hand, as African Muslims within these cultures within which we live, we've decided to create this other within by the way we look, by the way we understand, and the way we practice hijab. And that has created a problem. By the way we, as men, also in Islam, portray, look, and seek to identify or create a separate identity within the communities within which we live. Now, these are desperate times which require desperate thinking in terms of how we move henceforth. And I'm of the view, and I've had this discussion Allah accept her, inshallah she passed on, and my daughters, on how my daughters were supposed to dress up as Muslims who are Zulu, who are South Africans, who interact with their cousins in the townships. And we came to a decision, because most of the time they felt excluded when they're in the townships, but they also felt excluded when they're with the established Muslims in South Africa. So we came up with a deal that they will observe hijab, but that hijab is not supposed to alienate them. In other words, they will look like their cousins without necessarily pronouncing their so-called Islam, because looking like most women and men look does not necessarily mean that you're Muslim. You just happen to embrace a culture which is predominantly practiced by others. But hijab is hijab. So if you go, for example, for some of us who have a chance, whether in Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, the Gulf, India, Pakistan, various forms of hijab. But all of it, the main purpose is about us looking modest and covering ourselves, without othering, without creating a position where we start being pointed out as different. And as a result, being targeted for looking different. Right now we have a political situation and a threat. And again, most of the men in this room can be mistaken for anything. But it's our women who are always vulnerable. And I think it's important for us to have this discussion openly. I mean, I can go anywhere, like after this I'm going to a funeral. Nobody will tell whether I'm Muslim or not. But we expect our women to look a certain part, notwithstanding that their fellow counterparts in South Africa are already observing hijab in a different way. So I'm of the view that this whole situation and social political challenge that we're facing, it's not going to stop anytime soon. Our women are going to be largely targeted because of how they dress up or because of how they observe the hijab. Now, what's the solution? And again, we have to be revolutionary in our thinking. I think our solution needs to go back to the drawing board and look at our mothers and our grandmothers, how they used to dress. They were observing hijab. So we don't have to necessarily look Asian for us to articulate our Islam. We're already Muslims. We live within people who are observing hijab. And we should try and not create the other or othering ourselves by looking foreign within these very antagonistic communities that we are likely to find ourselves. You are likely to explain your position after something happened to you. So my call to the leadership and to all of us is, let us go and have a discussion with our families on how we redefine hijab and how we should look. Because we like it or not, we are in trouble. And it's gonna be for some time. And it's not because we are targeted or because we're guilty, but because we ourselves have decided to choose to be the others within our societies and communities. I mean, I know, for example, there are certain other aspects of our culture which are evolving. Like, you know, we have nasheed, for example, in this masjid. That is the Zulu nasheed, when the youngsters are saying they should nasheed in Zulu. Sometimes we eat pap outside. You know, and I'm not saying we are anti the established cultures and tradition, but I don't think there's anything wrong with us continuing with that tradition of trying to redefine who we are amidst the challenges and social-political challenges that we're facing. And the discussion might be, we might as men be reluctant to have this discussion, as I've said, because we are protected. We can decide to look any other how, but our women are not. And it's us who insist on this definition of what hijab is. So maybe we should also allow women to begin to have these discussions amongst themselves. What does it mean to be Muslims in Soweto? And what are the political repercussions of othering? You know, it doesn't mean that if you dress in a certain way, you are likely to go to Jannah. You know, but it's important for us to observe hijab. But that hijab has to be defined by people who are impacted by that hijab. It's not supposed to be us as men who don't understand the social, cultural, and political challenges that women are facing at the market, Jawulani Mall, and all other places. It's not us who are supposed to define it anymore. Let them define it themselves, and let them come up with suggestions that are going to be protective and comfortable for them. And again, I've argued that there is nothing wrong with the current hijab that you observe from our aunt and aunties in the township at the moment. It's purely acceptable as part of hijab. You don't have to insist on looking like the other established Muslims for us to say and comfortably feel like the Muslims. I think I've belingered the point and I've made the point. So the challenge is, or the suggestion I have is, I think women must also have these discussions amongst themselves. And they must be allowed to speak amongst themselves. This is the dialogue. And this dialogue is likely to benefit all of us and our kids in future, that, you know, this generation faced this challenge, and this is what they came up with. And it's something that's worth talking about without compromising our position. So perhaps a discussion amongst our women folk is long overdue and is going to happen. The other point which I think is very important to mention is we need to define what's our interest. And our interest, of course, will be incorporated into the bigger national interest and Muslim interest. But what is our interest as Muslims in Soweto? That's where it starts. What is it that we'd like to see as Muslims in Soweto? We have to define it point by point and work towards achieving it. At the moment, we don't have an interest. You know, whenever are challenged by certain situations, we jump into a bandwagon. But what is our challenge? And I'll argue that our challenge is to widen the doors of the masjids and the masajids in Soweto and our communities, is to continue